dogs of doom are howling more.
A little background on me and that day. I work in real estate, more exactly commercial real estate, so my work takes me all over the place, from urban, industrial areas to very off-the-beaten-path secluded areas, farmlands, development lands, etc. On this day in particular, in October of 2012, my last assignment of the day was to go out and survey an old farmstead near Cayuga in Haldimand County, about 30 miles south of Hamilton, Ontario. The place had been vacant since the 90s. I arrived in the late afternoon, I'd say around 5:30ish. The place was the last one on a dead-end country road and couldn't be seen from the road. I went up the long driveway and proceeded to do my look over the place. There were 3 structures: the house, a garage, and a large tool shed. I walked around the front of the house, which was completely boarded up with no means of seeing inside. I proceeded around the far side towards the other buildings. The shed was basically fallen completely down, but the garage was mostly still completely up. I noticed around the side main door a lot of huge scratches, and the door was like half broken down but still held shut by a padlock on one side and the middle and upper hinge. The bottom part was forced inward, and the door and clapboards around it were covered with these scratches, but not like scratches a dog would leave. These scratches were huge and parallel but spread apart, almost like fingernail scratches, and very deep, obviously put there with a lot of pressure. That's when I looked down and saw huge paw prints, but not regular round paw prints, almost elongated a little bit. The area around this partially broken down door was covered with these paw prints. If I had to venture a guess at how wide they were, I would say at least 5 inches. I was wearing heeled dress shoes, and when I put my foot over the paw print, I could see the print on either side of my foot, and I wear a size 10. So I don't have tiny feet by any means. I began to get very uneasy, and that's when I recalled noticing that all the sounds of the forest were gone, and it was dead silent. That is when I noticed the stench, like wet dog, urine and feces. I mean, the whole area just smelled rotten like a swamp, rot and decay, but this smell was strong and very putrid. I got very uneasy, like all of a sudden I knew I wasn't alone, and decided I'd seen enough and quickly headed back to my car. That is when I heard something in the bushes, and it sounded big. It was going through the trees very quickly and hard. I got back to my car, got in, and locked the doors. When I started my car and turned when I started the car and turned the lights on, that's when I caught eye shine in the trees ahead of me. But the eye shine was not at the level a dog's head to be at. It was a lot higher. I would say 4 to 5 feet up, maybe even a bit higher. I could not make out a shape as it was getting towards dusk, and so there was a lot of shadows in the trees, but I thought I saw a large figure in the trees, but I couldn't be sure. I started to freak out a little bit and decided it was time to go. So I backed around, right into a wet, marshy spot, and kinda got my car stuck. I was more interested in watching this thing than where I was going, which was my mistake. My attention quickly went back to the car as I tried to free myself from the mud. When I got a look back to where this thing was, it was gone. The spot it was, I could see further into the trees, so there was definitely something there. But I could not exactly see a shape anymore, so just a large shadowy figure. After several seconds of rocking my car back and forth, I managed to get out, and I left very quickly. I don't think I have ever been so scared in my life. Like I said, I did not clearly see what it was, but I just had the intense feeling of evil. Something bad was there. I returned to that spot about a year and a half after this incident, and the place is gone. Someone bought the property and tore it down, and cut down a lot of the trees. But to the best of my knowledge, nothing has been developed there. It's still just vacant land. I've not really told anyone of this, as I don't want to be ridiculed or made fun of. A co-worker said it was probably a bear I saw, but I know for a fact there are no bears this far south in Ontario, unless it's in a zoo. I had long forgotten about this, till recently I saw a video on YouTube about someone's encounter with something very similar to what I described. I handled the sale of some farmland on the nearby Six Nations Indian Reservation. And the client was one of the few remaining pureblood Indians. I'd put him easily in his 80s, if not older. I asked him about odd happenings in the area, like strange animals in that area, and sort of told him of my experience. Not in detail, just that I was on that property. He responded with a question. You seen it, didn't you? He went on to say, there are many things that are unknown to this world, but wouldn't comment further about my experience. Only said, there is good reason that particular place has sat empty and unused for decades. I had the odd nightmare of that day for about a year afterwards, and I'm still very hesitant to do surveys in areas like that. This is my first time going public about this encounter, out of fear of seeing it again. This took place roughly 14 years ago. When I was a kid, my family moved out of the city and moved into a small town called Deer Brook, situated on the outskirts of Antigo, Wisconsin. Our house was surrounded by woods on 3 sides and a river and field in the back. The first year out there was really calm and relaxing, other than constant coyote howls every night, but every so often there would be a different howl. It was a deeper, much louder howl that would shake us to our core. At first, my parents would dismiss it as a wolf or just a bigger coyote, but something about it seemed off. One night in mid-July, my brother, my sister and I decided to pitch a tent in the back field along the tree line. We just wanted to go camping, I guess. We sat with sticks, roasting our marshmallows till it got really dark. Then the typical howls started up. But once again, that deep howl was back, and it sounded like it was right in our ears. With how loud it was, it's hard to even guess where it was coming from. So we decided to put out our fire and get in the tent. Later that night, my sister fell asleep, so my brother and I chatted and made jokes. Within minutes, we heard animals running around outside the tent, and then this little raccoon started to claw at the side of the tent that I was sleeping on. At first, I kept just poking at it, but then we heard something else. The crack of sticks from the trees. At that point, my brother thought it was a bear and told us to be quiet and woke my sister up. We started to hear footsteps coming closer and closer, pretty quick, and they were right next to me. The raccoon just bolted out of there, and they started to have this strange odor coming from somewhere. It smelled like copper, sulfur, and wet dog. It was almost overwhelming and made me want to puke. Then we hear our mum calling us, and as she shined the flashlight on us, it revealed the most unsettling thing I have ever seen. The shadow of this thing was shining through our tent, and it was massive. It had pointed ears that were tilted back like a dog on the prowl, and its hands were human-looking, with long fingers that ended in a point. The mouth was in the shape of a snout, just a little shorter, and it had a mid-sized tail. My mum started screaming, and whatever that thing was bolted back into the woods. We rushed outside with our mum, and we didn't go back out for a few days. Fast forward a few months. I was in the living room with my mum, while my sister was in the shower. We were watching Wheel of Fortune or something like that, when my sister screamed bloody murder. My mum jumped up and went to go get her. She pulled her out of the bathroom, and I got curious as to why she was freaking out. So I went to see. Above the shower was one of these super small windows that only a small head could fit through. And at the window was a set of red glowing eyes staring down at me. We stared at each other for what felt like a decade. I didn't feel fear, more just curiosity, and I didn't feel like I was in danger at that time. As my mum came in to then pull me out, the eyes turned away as well. The rest of the night was quiet after that. A few days later, my brother came back from his dad's. Him and I had bunk beds, so I'd always take the bottom bunk. That night was kind of a gloomy night. It wasn't real windy, but it was drizzling a little bit. Later in the night, my brother and I got woken up to the window being opened. It was locked beforehand, by the way. After that, we just closed it and went back to work and went back to bed. It happened again and again. It happened again and again, like 3 more times. Each time we locked it, but the final time was the worst. It flung open so hard. And then we saw what pushed it open. That same hand from the tent, but I can see it clearly now. It had matted black fur, or hair rather, covering its whole arm. The skin on its palms was like a light tan, and the claws were about 5-6 inches long. And on the bottom of the window, I saw its face, or what was showing. It was just the eyes, glowing bright red. They looked like the embers of a roaring fire. My brother and I bolted up and grabbed my sister and locked ourselves in the back gaming room. We stayed there for the rest of the night, and when my mum came home, we told her and packed our things. We moved out of that house in a day and took what we could fit, filling 1 car and a U-Haul. My stepdad's truck was full as well, and we never left to return. To this day, my family is scared to talk about it, but if my brother and I have a few drinks, we discuss it, but my mum just shuts down whenever it's brought up. Thanks for your time. After having my own encounter and reading about countless others, I've gained a new respect for these creatures. As I said in the account of my own experience, I never clearly saw it, but there was definitely something there. Decades ago, my uncle and a cousin each had an encounter on the same night. This was my uncle's encounter, and one of my 3rd or 4th cousins, although I've never spoken with my cousin about this. His account was only what my uncle told me. This happened nearly 50 years ago, but my uncle still remembers it clearly. I'll provide a bit of info on the area and our family. We lived in the family farmhouse with my grandparents, the last house on a dead-end country road. The small community of about 8 or 9 homes was referred to by the locals as Thames River Siding, but really it had no official name. That name derived from the close-by station name sign of the CN Railroad. The road went out and met another road at a T intersection. To the right, went over the tracks, then down through a ravine. and out to a main county road, and to the left, the road went through open fields for a mile or so, then turned 90 degrees and went over to the next secondary county road, where it ended again very near to another ravine on the left side. Our family had a band started by my grandfather. He, my mum, uncle and 2 cousins were in it. On this particular night, they had met for practice, which by 11 or 11:30 was winding down. Our one cousin left, and the remaining cousin helped my uncle tear down and put away the equipment, while my grandfather tended to the animals, which seemed very spooked and nervous, which really wasn't out of the ordinary, as there was a pack of wild dogs that made their way through every so often for a few years back then. The cousin left and headed home. His way took him out to the left of the end of the road, and over at the next intersection is where he had the first of the 2 encounters, but wouldn't become known for a few days. My uncle left 10 minutes or so afterwards, and his way home took him to the right over the main county road. This particular night was either a full moon or very nearly a full moon, as my uncle said it was a very bright night. He crossed the tracks and went down through the ravine, and as he approached the stop sign, something in the field to his right caught his eye. There was something large and tall standing sort of hunched forward and staring intently in his direction. This happened just as he was on the brakes, slowing down to stop, but also starting to angle the car for the left-hand turn about to be made. His sight of this thing went from glancing to his right to over his shoulder, then to the rearview mirror as the car stopped. He sat staring for what seemed like hours, he said, but was only seconds. Then this thing broke into a sprint directly at the car. My uncle said he was like in a trance of disbelievement, like his brain couldn't comprehend what his eyes were seeing. The field isn't an overly large field, but still would be 400 or 500 yards between the tree line and the road, and this thing covered it fast. My uncle snapped out of his trance and peeled out of there as fast as he could, watching in the rearview mirror the whole time. This thing was close enough to be illuminated by the taillights, and it was reaching out for the car as he peeled out. He said it ran on 2 feet, not on all fours, or even partly on all fours. 2 feet. It had dark-colored hair, either brown or black, appeared to have a muzzle similar to a dog, and had pointed ears on top of its head, and the eyes appeared to glow a dim yellowish orange. He said one strange thing was that he felt as if it wasn't looking at the car, but it was looking at him, in the car. That was about as detailed as he could get, only seeing it briefly like that. He raced home and called back to the house, and told them to lock the doors and stay inside. My grandfather asked why. My uncle said just do it. I saw something in the field, but I'm not sure what. Just lock up to be safe. That was the last and only time he'd seen anything like that. A few days later, at the next band practice, my uncle and cousin were sitting outside having a smoke, and my uncle told him about what he saw, expecting to be made fun of or called crazy. But instead, he said I saw something that night on my way home too. As he was approaching the stop, something ran across the road in front of him, making him hit the brakes and almost skid off the road. He said he only saw it for a split second, as it was moving, but what he could see of it, it looked like a massive dog or wolf, but looked like it was upright on 2 legs. It could have been the way it seemed to bound or jump over the road. He more or less described the exact same thing that my uncle saw. Whatever it was, it covered a good 2 miles, which included navigating some dense wooded areas and a pretty steep-sided ravine in only a matter of 10 minutes at the most, so it was fast. There were reports of strange noises, like growling, howls or barks in the woods along the Thames River, and around some of the farms in and around the time of these sightings. And he said there was some livestock found dead and partly eaten, but everyone tossed that up to the wild dogs that were around at that time. But my uncle knows that was no dog he's seen. No one else ever came forward having reported seeing anything. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed that video, please hit the like button and consider subscribing if you haven't already. A huge thank you to all the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. Links to everything will be in the description below. As always, thank you all so much for your continued support. I really do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.